Welcome everyone to our, this is our Business and Data Security Best Practices webinar, part of our Business Toolbox series. And it's hosted by the Chamber, and so we're happy to have everyone here. And just wanted to thank our continuing sponsor, Weaver, for this opportunity. And let me welcome our guests, Mark Boothe of TeamLogic and Professor Dipak Pravin of University of North Texas. Thank you both for joining us today, and looking forward to having a great discussion and having a Q&A with our guests as well. So my name is Joe Guerrero. I'm with IBC Insurance Agency, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's program, and I'll also be participating in the panel discussion as well. So just to summarize for our agenda today, we're really going to be focusing on business and data security best practices and how to develop programs to minimize the risk for your companies and for your employees. Topics are really going to range from identifying main cyber risks that are out there, where the vulnerabilities might be in your IT, infrastructure, and then we'll also discuss maybe some steps that you can also take in the event of a breach. So to help with this discussion, what we're going to start off with first is we're going to post a set of terms. And so you can see those there. And thanks, Jeffrey. Those are in the chat section. So these will come up during our various topics, and it'll just be good to leave the chat section open. And those are just, if anything, you're wondering what's that word or what's that term referring to, chances are it'll be posted here as well. And speaking of the chat section, we do want to have questions from our audience. So please feel free to put those questions in there as we're going through the topics. We'll be happy to answer those. We very much want this to be an interactive conversation. So to begin with, let me introduce our two speakers. So to start with, we have Mark Boothe of TeamLogic IT. And Mark is president owner of TeamLogic IT of Dallas. He's Dallas natives, graduated from Texas A&M University in '96. Before starting TeamLogic, Mark spent 20 years working in the financial services industry, focusing on technology solutions that could help companies optimize their operations. And Mark enjoys really helping organizations leverage IT best practices so that they can really upscale their businesses. And then next we have Dipak Pravin from University of North Texas. And Dipak is professor of the Department of Information Technology and Decision Sciences Department with research interests in science of cybersecurity, social science of cybersecurity, and ransomware. Dipak holds a doctorate degree in computer science from UT Dallas, and he has 25 years of software engineering and engineering management experience in the corporate sector. And then in addition, Dipak's also a member of the FBI's InfraGard, and he's been with them since 2011. InfraGard is a partnership between the Federal Bureau of Investigation and members of the private sector, and it's focused on the protection of the U.S. government's critical infrastructure systems. And then myself, I'm Joe Guerrero. I'm with IBC Insurance Agency, and so we are an independent brokerage, but we are a subsidiary of IBC Bank. We're a Texas community bank, been in the state here for over 50 years. We operate branches here in Texas and also in Oklahoma as well. And the agency provides all lines of commercial property and casualty insurance, cyber liability, which we'll be talking a little bit about today. But we also do workers' compensation, fleet vehicles for commercial auto, and life insurance as well. Okay, so to jump into our topics, we'll start first. And let me direct this one first to Mark. What we want to focus on to kick things off is talking a little bit about work from home. Since COVID has impacted, we want to talk a little bit about what that dynamic looks like and what some of the risks associated with that look like. And so we're going to turn that over to Mark to comment a little bit on what his feedback's been from work from home this year.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So we find ourselves working with and supporting people who all of a sudden are working from home. They've never worked from home before. And a lot of times they're not behind the company firewall anymore. That creates additional security issues. So a lot of people have had to scramble to button things up. Some of it the businesses can't control. I mean, if they're working from home and there is no VPN and firewall, what have you, now they're on their home network. And a lot of times that's not as secure as the company network would be. And so you have a need for companies to understand best practices for people working from home, right? And so some easy examples, and you should do this anyway, by the way, just for your own personal But you would be amazed how many times we're supporting a company like this and we survey the employees and they're using the default passwords to access the router in their home, right? So I have an Orbi, which is a Netgear product. It's one of the most popular ones out there. And when you get it out of the box, the default username is admin and the default password is password, right? So if you haven't done it, change your password. You'd be surprised the percentage of people that just left it as the default. And now they not only get access to your home network, but if you're online doing business things, they can compromise that as well. So you change your router password at home ASAP if you're using the default. And when it comes to actually logging into your Wi-Fi and joining the network, don't use some of the common passwords that people use. I mean, the most common ones out there are password 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. They'll use your address or something simple like that. If you get that kind of low-hanging fruit, then it's not just your data that's at risk. It can potentially now be your organization's, depending upon what you're accessing. So that's the first thing we need to think about that you see. The other thing is the use of VPNs and firewalls, right? So some businesses are big enough and ways that things are set up so they need a firewall. Other businesses, it's smaller and it's really more of a work group. But if you have people at a business and there's data there locally on their network that people are accessing, you really need to consider a firewall. We're taking on a new client right now today. We've got a big group of people doing administrative support in a centralized office. The security's not there. The very first thing we're having them do as we get them onboarded is let's get set up with a firewall, right? So a good one should include a VPN in it that's going to allow the employees to remotely access the data in a much more secure way. And you got to realize not all VPNs are the same as far as how they work. You know, there's a business firewall like I just described. And then there's also VPNs that are really more designed for personal use. It's not about accessing company data behind a firewall. It's really just more kind of anonymous browsing and not leaving any footprints. So there's ones you can pay for there, like ExpressVPN or long list of them. I'm not a fan of free ones that people really don't want to pay. There is a browser, the Opera browser, that has a free VPN in it, so that's an option. But you just need to realize there's a difference between the business ones and the consumer-focused ones, where it's more about covering your tracks online, and it's not really a traditional firewall that like you would think of for a business. The other thing we emphasize, and we see a lot more of this with people working from home, is they're not on the company network all the time. They're starting to store business data locally on their device. And a local copy is fine, but you really need to assume that that device could crash at any minute and you're not going to have access to it. So if you want a local copy, that's fine, but you also want to make sure that you have something in the cloud. And if you're working with an IT firm, the more devices they have to back up, the greater the cost. So our preference is to always get it on the server or get it in the cloud and then back that up. And that keeps the cost down. We're not having to back up as many things. So it just kind of simplifies the process. And then the other issue is we see a lot of businesses they don't think about it. They think email is more secure than it is, and they're emailing sensitive data all the time, and it's not always encrypted. So you need to think about if our employees are suddenly out there emailing things, do we need secure file sharing? Do we need ways to encrypt data? Maybe because we just want to, or maybe we have compliance requirements. A lot of our clients are going to fall under HIPAA regulations, financial service information. They could be sending personally identifiable information. So we just automated encryption for a financial service firm recently because they've been hit with a lot of email threats. And there's just times they need to send sensitive data. And if you do it right, you can go in and apply policies and automate that encryption. It's going to look and see if the data meets certain conditions. It's just automatically encrypted because the reality is you can't rely on users to always remember, hey, I need to encrypt this. They're doing 10 things at once. They get distracted. So we try to do what we can to just automate that and simplify the process. The other thing we bring on clients a lot of times is we see that people are not always good about using some sort of multi-factor authentication to access applications that have sensitive data, right? And there's very simple ways to do this. This could be your Microsoft 365. It could be a line of business applications, whatever it is. There are very free or low-cost ways to do that and protect your data a lot better. So, Job, one thing I kind of turn back and ask you is, not applying basic security concepts obviously opens you up to cyber attacks. Can you help us understand, work from home policies and how that can be important in your cybersecurity insurance policy?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I mean, in the same way that your employees have spread out and are working from remote locations, you have to think about too, okay, in your response. In the case of like a breach happens, that's going to change things versus if everyone was on site working out of the office, because now your risk has gone up potentially because you could have 20 people or more working from remote. And touching on some of the points that Mark made, they're saving stuff locally, and that may be adding to your exposure. A cyber insurance policy is essential. I mean, I can't stress that enough, because it's a backup. It's going to be there for you in the event of that breach to be able to make your business whole. Certainly in the case of like a ransomware attack. But you have to revisit those policies. Since COVID has hit and since people have moved from work from home, sometimes people may be working off of a policy that may be renewed for the last couple of years. Well, that there are endorsements, there are changes that the industry made during COVID to allow for the fact that remote employees are going to be there and the risk is going to go up. And you may be able to put endorsements onto the policy, but that's one of the challenges where if you're not revisiting your program, if you're not going back over your security to make sure that there aren't any loopholes, that could be potentially something that could be missed, because in the event of a breach, if your policy is still the same as it was, let's say 2 years ago, and you just renewed that, you didn't make the insurance carrier aware that, yeah, I've got my entire workforce is remote or half of them are remote. Those are the kind of things that have to be taken into account. And those are endorsements that can be added onto the policy, because what you don't want is, in the case of a breach, you're saying, okay, I've been paying for this, I need to use it, I put in the call. What you don't want is the carrier to say, I had no idea you were working remote. You have to read the specifics inside, just like everything else that we do in insurance and property and everything. It's all about the conditions of what the policy is going to respond to, what they're going to pay when an adjuster goes out. And so you've got to make sure that how your business is operating, the IT plan that you have, that's got to match the cybersecurity plan that you have. And if that one hasn't been updated, as I said, that's a good opportunity to reach out to your carriers and make them aware of that situation. And it needs to be an annual thing. We'll stress that in some other points of our discussion today too. The technical part of the IT security that Mark and Dipak are going to talk about, but also on the financial, the insurance side. These are things that need to be revisited multiple times throughout the year, because these things all need to join with how your business is evolving, so that it doesn't leave any gaps and it doesn't have any surprises in the event of a breach, because you want everything to work in your response when you have to file a claim, which hopefully you won't have to, but that's what we're focusing on here today. So. Thanks, Mark. Let me shift to Dipak, if you don't mind, and let me ask Dipak. We'll focus on going from work from home, where we have individuals. Let's talk a little bit about consumers and retail, that type of business. Enterprise. Let's talk a little bit about security best practices, and just from an educational standpoint, Dipak, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your feelings about how cybersecurity is elevated to such an important news topic.
Right. So thanks, Joe. One thing we need to recognize here is that we talk a lot about cybersecurity, but what we are really all interested, our goal is information security, right? All our businesses run on information. And looking at the screen right now, what has been happening is that the criminals have changed their mode. Why? Because that's where the profit is for them. Many of you may have heard of a person named Willie Sutton, right? Or Slick Willie. He was a bank robber in 1930s, and when FBI captured him and asked him, why do you rob banks? And his answer was, because that's where the money is. So similarly, the guys have figured out, the bad guys, where the real money is, right, or a path to the money. So that's why they have moved to this environment. Now, we'll come back to this in a second. We can be on the first slide for now. So I want to take, for all of us to take a step back and just take a big picture, right? So what is happening? We were all very much connected even before pandemic. But what has happened is that after pandemic, we have gone even more into it. But overall, what has happened over the last many years is that more and more information is now connected, right? And technology is changing very fast. And the third thing is the technology is very complex. I have worked in software engineering, which makes the software is what drives the whole internet, right? As we all know. And the software has become more and more and more complex. And there is no way to be 100% sure with respect to this. The software has no bugs or no problems, right? It's just impossible. And software is the hardest, most complex things we as humans have built. And we are building software only for last 60 years or so. So we are not really good at it. But we have started, all of them started using it so much. So that's why these problems, we have more information on the web, right, available or connected for anyone to reach, get it. The change is fast and it is complex. So these are the things we have to keep in mind. Now let's see what we can do about this, right? One of the things we can do all about this, we are all using our phones, right? We use them a lot. And other mobile devices also, our laptop, everything we can take with us. So I would like to talk a little bit about the mobile best practices. So one thing is, what should we do and what we should not do. So in terms of what we should do is that, like I said, the software changes fast, and companies have become really good at understanding whenever there is a reported security issue, they like to fix it fast. So we should all upgrade our software on a regular basis. Anytime the system tells us you need to upgrade, we should upgrade. Because while the software security is not the best, but it is getting really good, and companies have become good at fixing them quickly. So that is one thing. Second thing I would like everyone to do is, be able to power on and off their device on a weekly basis. This to be done for two reasons. One is that when you are using application and when you close it down, it may not go out of your memory and it may secretly be chewing your battery. So that is one thing. And the second thing is when you do power up and down, it also helps with the battery life. So that is the second thing we all should do. Can we go to the next slide? Now, third thing is connecting on a free Wi-Fi, right? We all know there is no such thing as free Wi-Fi. And if you are at a Starbucks or other location and trying to get your things done, right, you need to answer an email using your cell phone or whatever may be the case. You try to, there may be a free Wi-Fi from Starbucks or McDonald's or whatever may be the case. We never know whether that Wi-Fi is actually hosted by Starbucks or some guy in the middle sitting there and having their own Wi-Fi. And they put names so very close to what you would think Starbucks. We don't always read those things carefully, right? Because we are all in a hurry. So don't use Wi-Fi or free Wi-Fi. Or if, like Mark was saying, if you have a VPN on your device, then you can use it because then you are much safer. Ideally, we should have our own hotspot on the phone so that we can connect with it. That would be the best thing. But if not, don't use the free Wi-Fi for sure. Next thing I would like to, and also delete all unused Wi-Fis that you are not using. This is just to mention what Mark had mentioned already, that, what does a VPN do? So the top picture is a VPN. When we are using VPN, your laptop gets connected through a secure server to the big bad internet. Right? So, and the bottom one is where your computer is directly connected to the big bad internet. So we would rather have the top scenario where we have somebody securing us. With respect to Bluetooth on our mobile devices, right? And I'll come to this one. So let's leave it there, but I'll come to this in a second. So when you are using Bluetooth, we all like to connect our phone to the car's entertainment system or whatever, getting calls, etc. But what I would like to suggest is the moment you get off from the switch off the car, switch off the Bluetooth, switch on Bluetooth, switch on the car. That's how we should start practicing. Coming to this about the cookies or doing safe browsing on the internet, right? What is happening is that more and more companies, when they connect you to their website, they give you an option whether you want to use cookies. What is a cookie? So cookie is not is a technical term for putting some tracking code on your computer. So if I visit, let's say Bank of America, they may put some cookies on my computer. So next time when I go there, they know that it's me coming. But these cookies are used for many, many different purposes. And nowadays, they would let you customize what cookies you want to have on your computer. My personal preference, no unnecessary cookies. So whenever I get a choice, you can get those choices even on your phones, smartphones nowadays. Choose everything but the minimally necessary cookies. That is be my suggestion. And one other thing I would like to say about mobile devices is, I don't know if you can see this, but I like to put my name sticker and a phone number for my other family members. This has helped a lot of people that I know. I know some people like to put on their screen their name and phone number and other family members' phone number. But if your phone battery is dead, others can't see it. I personally have left phone in grocery stores and other places, and they have called, family members. So again, this is just a personal thing that I like to say. And the last thing I would quickly say is a personal recommendation from my side, is freeze your credit. You can go to XP, and now I'm switching to a different topic slightly, but it is very important that we can go to Experian or the four big credit agencies and freeze our credit. And the reason is that if your other information like password, etc., is compromised, and if they can get to your credit history or credit records, they can do a lot more damage using the information they collected, and now having this additional capability. So you want to plug holes anywhere you can. So that's a personal recommendation. And I think there is a lot to it, but these are simple facts, simple steps that we can do. We can upgrade the phones on a regular basis. We can disconnect the Wi-Fi that we are not using, delete the Wi-Fi's we are not using, and use Bluetooth only when necessary, and don't use public internet as much as possible. So there's a more we can connect, but I think there is other aspects that Joe would like to cover, so we can move to that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deepak. And yeah, I mean, one point I will make that I noticed between your answer there and also what Mark was discussing is the idea, of the VPN connection and a secure server. We all see a lot in the marketing of using cloud and those storage systems. And the good thing is for like small business owners, those prices are coming down. And sometimes in the past, people may have thought, that may not be practical. We'll just continue what we're doing, storing it locally. But hopefully what we can get out of the messages today is that that's becoming more and more dangerous, because there's more and more doors that are open for people to get access of that local data, whether it's on your devices like Mark was talking about. But having that type of capability of a cloud storage, it's going to give you an extra layer of security, even if you're a small business. And as I said, those are some ideas to look through just to get some pricing on how, because it'll also be a savior. It'll save on space as well as adding an additional layer of security. So I think that's a good point that's come up in both topics so far. We'll shift back to Mark. I want to talk a little bit about just some best practices on what we can do to mitigate that risk. Mark touched on it a little bit, but he's going to go into a little bit more depth here.
Yeah, so I'm going to just talk about a question that Larry just put in the chat, and he asked, what are some companies to use for a business VPN? So a lot of times a business already has a firewall, and if that's the case, there's usually a firewall capability built into it, so we'll use that. But if we're going into an environment where they don't have a firewall, examples, a new client I had, they've got 10 locations and they had no firewalls anywhere. You can go different routes. So some of the more popular ones out there that we run into for small to medium businesses, you're going to have Sonic Wall is a very popular one. Barracuda, Fortinet is a very big one that's out there. Cisco has Meraki, Sophos. There's probably 7 or 8, I would say, that are the major ones out there that's got a firewall with a VPN built into it. And then there's some people using business-wise that really, to me, a little bit more designed for consumers. But on the personal side, you can use like Express, Nord. But there's a list of them. I mean, PC Mag and a lot of these people do reviews, and they're generally pretty spot on as far as, you know, what the features are and all that kind of stuff. But if you're outside of the business world and you just want to have a little bit better security when you're going around, kind of cover your tracks, a VPN is certainly not a bad idea at all for business use. So other things you can do as far as mitigating cyber risks. So we took on a client the other week, and some of the users' devices had no minimum password requirements set in place. You could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something like that. They were not properly leveraging the domain controller to be able to set policies across everybody that was part of their domain. So if you don't know how to do that, we definitely recommend that you find a resource who can do those kinds of things. They also, 2 of the people there, including one of the partners, had it set to where you could have as many password attempts as you want, right? And so at the beginning, Jeffrey put in the chat kind of some terms. So this is where you open yourself up to a brute force attack, that somebody can just keep trying to type in passwords and have unlimited attempts. So we're buttoning all of that up for them right now. And it's a simple thing to do. You just have to have somebody that knows how to do it. The other thing is if they're in the cloud, if they don't really have a physical server, some smaller businesses, we just get them into Microsoft 365, and we can use Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud, to kind of set in policies that way instead of using a traditional physical server, which a lot of people out there still have. We try to put in policies or make sure we put in policies that's going to lock somebody out if they have too many false attempts. And we're going to check for all those things. You know, when we bring on a client as part of onboarding, the first thing we do is some sort of a network or security assessment. If you've not had a professional IT firm perform a network or security assessment for you within the past year or 2, I would highly recommend that you have somebody to come in and do it. It's kind of like getting blood work for your technology. The other thing we find is a lot of times people recycle the same passwords, and they're simple passwords. And if that's a hassle and you have, 50, 100 passwords you have to remember, like most of us do, it's not that expensive to go out there and get a password manager, right? So there's LastPass, there's Duo, there's Okta. These help you manage and do, single sign-on capabilities. People just don't want to remember different passwords that are long and complex, and I get it. It's not fun for me anyway. I will say a lot of people will tell you that passwords by themselves are not really that great at what they're designed for, because people kind of game the system and they want to keep it easy and try to recycle things. So we're getting closer to moving towards a passwordless society and using things like biometrics and other kinds of authentication. We're not there yet, but I think we will get to a point where passwords are not even the traditional password, something that we're not even going to use. The other thing you can do that's very simple is multi-factor authentication should be enforced by policy. People should have no choice in a business. It should be enforced by policy when you access any application that has sensitive data. There are free ways to do this. You can use Microsoft Authenticator, and then if you want somebody to manage this at a higher business level and set policies and manage all the users for authentication purposes, you can do that as well. I'd love to sit here and tell you there's a way to get you 100% secure that myself and Dipak and Mark Weber, we just say, hey, we just do this, it's never going to happen, okay? At least not now, we're not there. So the real goal when it comes to security is to be a hard target, right? Be tougher than the other people, right? This isn't the best way to think of it, but when you watch a pack of lions go out there hunting and they're going after a pack of whatever else, they usually go for the weak ones at the back, right? They're not going to try to work harder than they can. So you just need to be, you don't have to be at the very front of the pack because that's going to cost a lot of money, but you at least want to be on the upper half or somewhere in there. And as sad as it is, let them get somebody else who's not buttoning up and following some basic procedures. Other things you can do that are not expensive at all that I really feel people should do more of is employee training. So some industries for compliance requirements, you have to demonstrate to be compliant with certain standards that you're doing user and awareness training. But even if you're not required to at a bare minimum, we think you should really look at phishing campaigns. And this is where periodically emails will go out. They're not malicious, but they're designed to look malicious. Hopefully the user just deletes it and says it doesn't look right, but if they do click on it, there's going to be a report that goes to whoever's running the campaign, and they can see who's clicking these, and then there can be some education that teaches people what to look for. The reason I bring that up is if you look statistically, about 60% of the time, if a business is compromised, roughly 60% of the time, email is the way they got in. And all the email threat protection in the world, it may stop 99%, but it's not going to stop 100%. If it gets through, your best line of defense is an educated employee that knows that that's not legitimate, and I don't want to click the link or open the attachment. The other thing, we were talking about this earlier, that a lot of businesses don't understand about is the dark web, which is a separate little network aside from the traditional internet. So there are hidden networks and marketplaces out there where you or your organization's information could be for sale to the highest bidder. Okay. And so there are tools out there that can go scan and look to see, is your social security number, passport number, bank account number, credit card numbers, whatever it is that information out there? All industries, everybody gets targeted by this. I will say healthcare is by a healthy margin the most effective because of just the sheer quantity of data that they have and the sensitivity. And then the other thing I'll tell you, it's not going to solve everything. There are scenarios where this won't save you, but when it comes to managing backups, just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean you don't need to back it up, right? So some people have this false sense of security that, well, it's in the cloud, so it's bulletproof. I'll give you a simple example. Almost all of my clients, we always recommend it. They don't always feel they need to do it, but we recommend if they have sensitive data in Microsoft 365, we recommend that they do a third-party backup. If you've ever had to call the 800 number at Microsoft, getting them to do a restore on a Microsoft 365, there's no guarantees, and it may take a long time to do it. It's a pretty cost-effective way to back it up to a third party, and somebody like us can get you back up and running very quickly. When you do this, it won't be magic, so you have to kind of back into, at the end of the day, when we back this up, there's something called RTO and RPO, and that is your recovery time objective and your recovery point objective. Right, and the sooner you want to move those up, there's other things you can do. The cost is going to go higher, but you also have to think about if we're down for that many hours or whatever the period of time, what's the loss to the business. So with that, Joe, I'll turn it back to you, and I think you have some questions for Dipak now.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Mark. And just one of the things I got out of that as well is where part of this is all around having a plan. All the elements that we're discussing. Really comes down to, I think the most important takeaway for everyone is if you don't have a plan in place for how your cybersecurity program works, and then what you do if you were impacted, that's a stepping point. I mean, that's really where you need to start. And we've got some great resources here, and we'll be able to provide some links for Mark and for Dipak afterwards for additional questions. But for anyone in your networks and that kind of thing, that's one of the easiest questions to ask someone is, do you have a cybersecurity program in place? Those are easy yes, no's. And if the answer is no, then chances are a lot of these things, they're going to be open to a lot of these vulnerabilities. And so just taking the time to kind of think about where, what type of financial data. Mark talked a lot about healthcare, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that. You can just be a retail business and just have credit card data. You're a good target there. They can break into the system from the parking lot in retail shopping centers. It's a matter of trying to step outside and not think about, well, I don't have social security numbers. I don't have HIPAA data and that kind of thing. I'm not necessarily going to be a high target. You may not be a high priority, but you're still a target. And for some of those folks out there, you may be low hanging fruit, because for a ransomware attack, it may be an easy one for them to say, will this guy go get $10,000 to get his data back? If I can easily get in through his email, if there's easy ways to get in, he'll pay that much to recover his data. So again, this goes to the planning part of it. Even if you're a small business owner, the planning and the preparation, because it'll open up other questions too, and that'll allow you to engage to kind of figure out Are there some cost-effective options? You know, we were talking about cloud and VPN. It helps you explore those type of options to find out if there's some other vendors out there that might be able to serve you to host your data safely and do it at a price point that that maybe management may not think is such sticker shock. So yeah, let me shift to Dipak to talk a little bit more about email. We've been spending quite a bit on that, and as Mark pointed out, 60% of these attacks are really coming through email, and it's and training, is a huge part of that. So Dipak, if you will, just talk a little bit about continue about email best practices, some case studies.
Sure. So if we can get to that slide. Okay. I'll give you a second for everyone to take a quick look at it. And bottom line is, like it says, on the internet, nobody knows you are a dog. And the idea here is when you get an email, you don't know who it came from, right? And as Mark and Joe have mentioned, that a lot of attacks happen through the email. And I'm going to talk about a specific group of those attacks, which are so easy for them to, well, they're so easy for them to really carry out. And we'll see this if we go to the next slide. So if you take a look at it, on the left-hand side, there's an envelope with money. And it says, "Dear company, please send money." That's all they do. And literally, that's all they do. Any Shark Tank program fans here? So if you know about Shark Tank, this is a program where people go and pitch their business ideas and get money. And one of the investors there is Barbara Corcoran. And she is a huge real estate investor. And her company was lost $380,000 last year just based on an email that somebody received in the finance department, right? So phishing for funds is a reality. So, and the slides that I'm going to show next few ones came from a very well-known person in that area. So we can get to the next slide. So business email compromise is a category recognized by all, who work in the cybersecurity area. And there are two things that happen, the two ways that you can be impacted. One is that you receive a fraudulent email, right? You receive an email from your supplier that, oh, invoice number 6597 has not been paid yet. And then somebody will say, oh, well, that is overdue. Otherwise, you will have to pay 10% more, or something like that, right? And somebody will go ahead and pay it, right? That's one. The second thing is that your customer may get a fraudulent email from you. So they are posing as you, asking your customer to send some money. And let's see what the different types of attacks go. So there are four most common attacks that happen. So one is supplier account change. So your supplier calls or sends an email, right, and says, oh, you have been paying us on our Bank of America account, but now we have moved to Chase Bank. So this is our new account, and you just make us a payment there, right? So, and everything may look very legit there. The email comes from one of your suppliers. The second thing is, you may get a fraudulent invoice from somebody. It may be from government or your lawyer saying that, oh, that matter we were discussing with whatever company, we have agreed to pay them $10,000. So, right, so just wire the money. This is their bank account. So that kind of information, right, a fraudulent invoice or that type of information. Third is a very common is where an executive is sending a transaction request. So it comes from CEO or CFO or somebody and says, oh, we have come to terms with this company and we need to pay them $5,000 deposit or whatever may be the case. And all of these have some urgency that we need to do it now. And the fourth one is, executive asking for data, asking for W-2 for everybody in the employee because we are doing some audit, an external third-party audit, and we need that information now. So these are the most common attack scenarios, but variations can happen. So if we go to next one, how do they find information about you so that they write a convincing email? We all put a lot of our information out there, right? We are on LinkedIn, we are on Facebook, and various other things. And one of the mentions there is a friendly phone call. Friendly phone call works. Somebody calls and says, oh, I'm doing XYZ, I'm doing this research. Can you tell us about 5 of your customers? We will just reach out to them, and we are doing this survey. I'm working for I'm in some university, and most people are wanting to be helpful and provide this type of information. So these various techniques, also social engineering or social media, works very, very well. If we move to the next one. So what do you do about this? This is happening. Billions of dollars are getting lost through this mechanism, right? And that's why, if you remember the first picture where the criminals moved to cybercrime, because it is easy to do. They don't need to use a gun. They just need to send an email, right? So business, what? So three things that we need to be cognizant of. One is people, right? People are the most vulnerable in some sense. The second is business process and policies. And the third is technology. So let's go to the next one. And if you break any of those three, you are good, and you can stop the attack. So while people may be the weakest link, they are also the strongest in some sense. And what I mean by that is all of us have intuition and some insight and a smell of things. So if if we just think a second about something, which if we get one idea, that a flash of an idea that something is wrong, doesn't sound right, most likely it would be right. So sometimes training helps to bring all these things, and actually not sometimes, training always helps. So if something doesn't feel right, then people should act on it, and we should be all cognizant of that and train our employees accordingly. And if you look at these, the three factors, be wary of the messages. Like, if it involves fund transfer, think about it. Ask for sensitive information, well, it could be a problem, right? If it is not on a normal business scenario. And urgency, right? If an audit is going on, audits generally takes days, right? It doesn't require a minutes kind of thing. Sometimes it does, but most of the time your response can be, over a period of time. So these are the factors we have to be, preparing everyone for. The next one, policies and procedures. And these, for a small business, also it means, right? Small businesses also have their own policies and procedures, that if the amount is over $500, then 2 people in the company should talk about it, or 5,000 or 50,000, whatever may be the scale, right? So those are the various policies and procedures that should be in place. We have to take a step back sometimes and think how we want to run our business to keep our information safe, right? If we start keeping information safe, then in the whole process, we start training ourselves, and our money will become safe for, as well as in that process. And the next one, please. And the technology helps. Mark can tell you about various email security gateways that you can use. So those email security gateways, before an email comes to you, they will take out all the spam, which happens even on the free emails. But these email security gateways go a lot deeper and try to make email business safer for you. I mean, doing business with email safer for you. And I have one more point that I would like to make about the keeping information safe, in about sharing data securely. Now, I'm saying keeping and sharing data securely. What I mean is that we have data or information because a bunch of people, right? One or more people need to use them. So it is never just keeping the data, but it's also sharing them, right? And various mechanisms have been talked about, and I'm just pointing out a couple of things. Like there is, Citrix share file is an option There are other options, and sometimes people ask, is Dropbox file sharing safe? It's kind of safe, but not as safe as other more commercial grade file sharing solutions. And Mark may have a better, more directed suggestion based on your business. So I think overall, email will remain, because we use email a lot, it will remain a major vector for attacking you, and we should all be aware of that. I would like Mark to see if he wants to add any more points to what I said.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll make one brief point, then I want to turn it over to Joe and ask him to talk about some things. I would just say in general, what we've seen over time is, years ago, we all used to get the Nigerian prince, need your assistance, and a wire transfer, right? It was very general, and it worked up to a certain point. What we're seeing now broadly is these malicious emails are a lot more focused on current events. It's COVID, it's a John Hopkins alert on COVID, or it's something about a stimulus check. They're trying to focus on current events because they know that has people's attention, and they're more likely as a result to get you to click the link or open the attachment, right? So, Joe, the question I have for you was, I presented an event last week, and most of these people didn't even know cybersecurity insurance even existed. They didn't know that was a thing. Something like 90% of businesses don't even have a cybersecurity policy. What can you tell us that we need to know about it?
Well, first off, it's essential. As we've obviously made the points here, and you've emphasized that a lot, Mark, is that, a lot of these techniques are good and they're going to catch a lot of those, but they're not 100%. They're not foolproof in the same way. And so what I try to advise folks is that they've got to look at their computer systems, because in a way, statistically, there could be a potential of a loss on that versus a fire or a tornado hitting the building. And so, now while they may be, up to doing a good job on their property and they keep that insurance because they're thinking, yeah, I've got to be protected against floods and that kind of thing. And they're diligent there, may not necessarily be as diligent on the cybersecurity side. And if you dig into it and you find out they do have remote employees, that's where you might say, there's a chance that you could be impacted by this risk even more than the others, or even if you've got delivery vans driving around the Metroplex. It's like, you might even get hit with cyber before you have a major a car accident. So part of my challenge is just getting people to recognize the risk. An important part, like Dipak had mentioned, is what are you storing? What are you doing? What are you saving? Any kind of customer information that makes you vulnerable. I would say especially if you're in healthcare, that one's a given. But like I said, even our retail customers that have credit card information, that you're a target at that point. So part of it is identifying the risk. And then just making people realize that this is something that you need to invest in. It's still the industry is starting to go through a little bit of a shift, and cybersecurity is relatively new in the past 10 years. And it used to just be kind of an all-in-one folded into policies that you could just buy in as an endorsement, as a flat rate. You pretty much said, I did or did not have any breaches. There were some really basic underwriting questions, and we could usually quote that. It is getting more complex. So, and this is only going to continue. The cost will go up, but also the underwriters are starting to ask a lot more questions. In the past, even people that maybe were telecom service providers or had different smaller businesses where maybe the risk wasn't as apparent, underwriters are starting to ask a lot more questions now. They want to know more about your business, and they're getting savvy enough to know, tell me about the data that you're storing, because that will help them figure out what type of policy do you need to have. But the good news is that there's more resources now that are being put forward to the consumer, so that we're not laying it on you to kind of say, you tell me what you need. The industry is evolving more to where we can really be more of a counselor to hear more about the business, and then come back and say, these are new cyber programs that are out that are structured for your business. So Hartford, Chubb, Travelers, the large global companies are doing a really good job with small business owner programs. Whereas, like I said, it used to be kind of an all you can eat. You can just fold into a property policy. Now you're starting to kind of choose between the different program that you are a part of. And then, of course, if you're in any aspect of healthcare or IT, those are becoming much more advanced, a lot more underwriting questions. but it's urgent because the insurance carriers really got to get a handle on your business, because they've got to understand potentially what could come back if a breach happens. And that takes me back to the point that I was mentioning about having a plan. The cyber insurance part has become part of this process now, and it's not something, as I kind of mentioned earlier, we don't want to look at this as something to where you're purchasing it, it's part of the renewal, and the policy just goes into effect. It's something that you've got to revisit, and you have to make sure that your point person, whoever, whether it's your IT manager inside or if you're outsourcing that, everyone's got to be on the same page as to what that policy is and what it'll cover. We're all aware of the declarations pages on our coverages, and that's where wind and hail on your house and that kind of thing. What the insurance company is going to pay for, what it's not going to pay for. Same thing will go into cyber. There are some companies that are pretty particular about we are going to pay a claim, but we may have these bullet points of requirements that have to be met during the year. And so those are things you have to make sure your IT manager knows, or if you're outsourcing that, to a managed services company, you got to make sure that they're up to speed on that, so that all those boxes are check marked, so that in the event of a claim, you don't want the carrier to come back and say the requirements weren't met. We're going to deny that. And so the more specific your business is, the higher the risk. We are starting to see that evolve, which is why it's becoming, I think, more important for everyone to get more involved into the cyber insurance policy and look at that the same way that you're looking at your auto, the same way that you're looking at your property and that kind of thing. And the last thing I would say is, as far as when you're compromised, when that happens, obviously your first call is it's a physical response. You got to figure out, okay, where did the breach happen? You start that investigation part of it. But part of the thing with the cyber insurance policy is, depending on who you're with, the carrier may or may not have a right to decide how that's investigated. And this is something that's really, really become important in the last year. A lot of the carriers, in order to keep their costs down and offer you a lower premium, especially the smaller businesses, they're starting to take more ownership of what happens when a breach happens. And this is something that's changed, prior really to COVID. But all the stuff that happened last year, those are starting to make the insurance companies now say, we're going to offer you this policy. However, part of that is, though, when the breach happens, we have to be notified immediately. And that goes to what I mentioned. You've got those checkpoints. You've got to know what's going to happen. But some people may not be aware that you're basically turning over to the insurance company. They're going to investigate it. They're going to solve the problem. And if need be, if they use legal counsel, it's all going to be them. We have had instances where people think, well, I'm going to use a lawyer, or I have someone that's in corporate law that I'm going to engage that does that. You've got to be checking on that cyber insurance policy that you have to make sure that they're going to allow you to go outside of the policy and engage, use your own legal, or if you're going to use like a digital forensics, and they're the people that look for what happened when a breach happens. Those are important points too. And that's, like I said, that just goes to emphasize what I was mentioning, is that the policies are getting more complex. Like Dipak mentioned about the threats, they're not going away. Email, the way that we're using email, these things are going to continue, and cybersecurity the insurance is going to continue as well, and it is going to get more complicated. The last thing I would mention is a help is for any business owners, any companies that have HR, and this may be something you can pass along to your networks as well. Mark mentioned a point about training and how now you're starting to really, it's not just the software, it's not just outsourcing to IT, you're also training your employees too. The good thing about this is you can now bring HR into the cybersecurity part of the conversation. The more people you can have on board the program so that they know what their responsibilities are and what happens when a breach happens, the better, because you're sharing that responsibility out. But what we're seeing now is a lot of the top companies, a lot of middle market companies, HR is getting involved because now they're being tasked with, you've got to take your part in also training the employees on email security and password security. It's not something where we're just going to dump that on the desk of the IT person, because there may only be one IT director in a small business, and there's got so much on their plate as it is. And you may be paying for that HR, or you may be outsourcing that to like some independent HR consultants. This is an action item there where you can get them involved saying, I've got a cyber insurance program. Part of that is I have to have employee certifications, maybe every quarter or twice a year. They're going to make sure that we do some kind of training on password protection, on phishing scams, on email. You can engage HR now and get them involved so that they're working with IT to make sure that both of them have responsibility that the employees are buttoned up there. So like I said, even if the policy is getting a little bit more diverse and there's a lot more to understand, this also opens up some opportunities up for our business owner, our friends out there to say, we've got other people in the company that can now get involved to all take responsibility. But last thing I'll just mention is going back to it's a plan. It's all about a plan. I think it begins there and ends there. If you don't have a plan in place, that's the most important it's an important thing to get out of this whole discussion. And it's where we really want you to start, is to say, I just need to map it out because I need to find out what I have and what I don't have. And then you can take the time and reach out to folks like myself, reach out to Mark, Dipak, and there are other consultants in the chamber, and let us advise you on what we can do to help broaden that out so that you can lessen that risk. So with that, we'll see if there's any other questions. I think we may have mentioned most of our comments in the question section. I don't see any others, Jeffrey, but if you see any more, thank you, Dipak, for responding to a lot of those questions in real time. I think we covered just about everything there. Well, we'll just ask if there's anyone else on the line, if anyone else has any comments they want to make to us, feel free to do that. We can answer those for you. And if not, yeah, we'll start our wrap up here. I want to thank Mark and I want to thank Dipak for sitting in with us and offering their expertise.